as adults, we often don't consider how difficult it is to create these player-centered environments. It takes work. It's easy to throw the kids out there on a 5v5 basketball team on an adult-sized basketball court because you don't have to make any modifications for them. You don't have to find smaller-sized balls or smaller goals or what have you. Same thing in soccer. It's easy to throw them on the big field. It's easy to give a volunteer parent coach, you got 6-year-olds, here's 20 of them. Yeah, good luck. Kindergarten teachers struggle with that. Now you're giving a novice parent coach who just wants to volunteer their time and be out there with their kid. And it's basically like herding cats for them. So as adults, we need to really think about how do we create these player-centered environments and how much time and effort and energy it goes into that.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Zac Crawford. Zac is a former soccer player and coach, and now serves as a Grassroots Coach Educator for U.S. Soccer, and you can hear more about his journey back in the previous episode. In this conversation, we talk about the 4 ages and stages of development, practice design fundamentals, the play-practice-play model, and more. If you enjoyed this episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast. And coaches, we wrapped up our first annual summer coaching series, and you can still get access to all the video replays, audio-only replays, coaching notes, and more from all 12 sessions at summercoachingseries.com. Check out the incredible lineup of guests we had and hear what other coaches had to say about their experience. That's summercoachingseries.com. And one final note about this episode before we hop in. This conversation was recorded live at a coaching convention, so there may be a bit of background noise at times. But we did our absolute best to edit the audio to bring you the highest quality possible. Now to part 2 of my conversation with Zac Crawford. Enjoy the episode.
Let's kind of shift a little bit, and I want you to walk through the actual model that you guys have at U.S. Soccer, the 4 different ages and stages of the game that you recommend youth players go through.
Yeah, so as I said before, our framework is based off of this idea of developmental psychology. And we look at the different age groups that are in each of the game formats. So at 4v4, 4 versus 4, those are for the U6 to U8 age groups. So we have to ask ourselves the question, why do we play small-sided games in the first place? We put a 6-year-old onto a field that's 120 yards long by 80 yards wide, 11 versus 11, with adult-sized goals. Those kids are never going to touch the ball. They're short attention spans. They're going to be looking off in the distance or picking daisies or whatever, and we want them to enjoy the game. There's an idea of cumulative aspect of learning, right? And so we start small-sided games at U6 and U8. And we talk about U6, the ball is playing with me, and then I'm playing with the ball. So think about that idea. The ball is playing with me. They're struggling to learn how to modify and move and adapt their bodies to just having a soccer ball at their feet. So we want them to get comfortable with the ball at their feet at U6 and just be introduced to it. And they move into U8 now. They're a little bit more developed cognitively, psychomotor. They can move their bodies a little bit more. Psychosocially, they're a little bit less egocentric. It's not all about me and mine and I, but it's about learning how to play with my friends. And so now they can start to cooperate and coordinate their actions with other players because of how they develop cognitively at that age. They're a little bit less egocentric. At U9 and U10, it's now about playing with my team. So understanding the different aspects of attacking and defending as a group. So it's more than just playing with my friend, it's playing with a group of friends and starting to understand how they do that as a slightly larger group. Again, they're a little bit more developed. psychosocially, so they can understand how to interact with each other at an even deeper level. Cognitively, they can now start to understand a little bit more abstract concepts. And if you go back to Piaget's stages of development, this is what this is all based off of. You'll see how they move from that egocentric stage into kind of this abstract conceptualization stage of where they can start to think about if-then. If I move here, then my teammate can go there. Or if I move here, then the opponent will go there, type things. The next stage is U11 and U12. So that's the 9 versus 9 game. So we're moving into slightly larger number of players and in the field size. So at 4v4, field size is very small, 40 by 30 yards. At 7v7, we're looking at about a 60 by 40 yard field, again with small goals that are appropriate to them. At 9 versus 9 now, you're looking at a field that's 90 yards long, 80 to 90 yards long, and 50 to 60 or so yards wide there. These kids are now learning how to play, learning a role for the team, learning a position, a task for the team. All right, they got introduced to it at U10 when they're playing 7 versus 7, but now they're starting to understand really what those functions of those different roles are as they attack and defend as a team. At U13 now and above, it's about being the best player that you can be in that role and position for the team. So having kids have a variety of experiences, playing multiple roles, multiple positions for the team, as they're growing up through all the ages up until U12. And not saying at U13 you need to pick a specific role. We're just saying that, hey, give them a lot of opportunities to learn how to attack and defend different roles. You never know how these players are going to grow up, especially U11, U12. Talk about the physical aspect, the psychomotor aspect. They're about to go through puberty, or they're starting to go through puberty. So their bodies are changing. So we have to, adapt our environments to fit those needs. As players start to shoot up, some will be early bloomers, some will be late bloomers. How do we adapt our environments to fit those needs? And then when they get to U13 and older, most kids, not all, have gone through this growth spurt, have gone through puberty, and now they're a little bit more comfortable with their bodies. They can definitely understand abstract concepts a little bit better. Cognitively, that's the deal there. They can understand those abstract concepts. They can really think ahead, plan ahead. And those are the types of things that we need to use to create these environments. And I'd be happy to share our Grassroots Player Development Framework. I'll just drop my email address here. It's zcrawford@ussoccer.org. If anyone wants to see, this framework in detail, I'm happy to share that.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And just to confirm, U13 and up, that's 11 on 11, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. That model, the progression from small numbers to ultimately 11 on 11, how it's played at the highest level, is so important to tie back into what we talked about earlier with, if we want kids to enjoy the experience, to continue to play, they need to be involved in the game, having opportunities to make decisions, get reps and touches on the ball in soccer or in other sports, right? Like we were talking about it with basketball. Basketball is not at this place yet. And it's really bad for development that we have 6-year-olds playing 5-on-5 in basketball, because the same thing happens when, as if you were to play 9-on-9 or 11-on-11 with 6-year-olds. 1 or 2 people dominate the ball and the other kids pick daisies, right? And it's not their fault that they're bored.
Yeah.
They're not having any opportunities to be a part of the game, to make impactful decisions, because the numbers don't fit them, the size of the field doesn't fit them. Like all those things are playing against them actually having a positive experience. And I just think that it's so important that there is a massive effort to educate those involved about it. And really, again, what we talked about at the beginning, just to consider who's in front of us and what they need. Like, this isn't about us, it's about the kids. What would be great for the kids in this experience? All the way up to, those 13 to 18-year-olds. Like, what do they need at this age and stage?
Yeah, as adults, we often don't consider how difficult it is to create these player-centered environments. It takes work. It's easy to throw the kids out there on a 5v5 basketball team on an adult-sized basketball court, because you don't have to make any modifications for them. You don't have to find smaller-sized balls or smaller goals or what have you. Same thing in soccer. It's easy to throw them on the big field. It's easy to give a volunteer parent coach, you got 6-year-olds, here's 20 of them. Yeah, good luck. Kindergarten teachers struggle with that. Now you're giving a novice parent coach who just wants to volunteer their time and be out there with their kid. And it's basically like herding cats for them. So as adults, we need to really think about how do we create these player-centered environments and how much time and effort and energy it goes into that. One thing that I did in Alabama, I'll say not I, but we did as a state, because it wasn't just me. It's always a village when we talk about creating these environments for kids. It's not just what one coach can do. It's what we can all do. Players, coaches, parents, referees, all working together. We created a youth academy for all the clubs. And it was an academy format or system, meaning that there weren't specific teams, which kind of goes against the classic sport experience. You have your team, you play for the Blue Jackets or whoever, and the kid kind of identifies with that team. And it's easy for parents to have the schedule. It's easy for the league coordinator to make the schedule and say, okay, you play here with this team on this date. But in an academy format, it's a very fluid structure. You can move players back and forth between teams, between age groups, because it's what fits the individual player needs. So you have a player who's an early bloomer, you can sometimes play them up an age group and then sometimes bring them back down. So you want to have them struggle a little bit, play with some older kids, come back down to their own level, have some success, help bring the level of the other players up around them. And ultimately, you create this kind of fluid structure, this ecosystem of player development, because it's not always linear. We have to adapt to the needs of the individuals, and it's really hard to do, but we have the obligation as coaches, as sport leaders, to do that. And let me give you this stat real quick, because this is what we're facing. A lot of people don't realize this. In 2008, this is from a study from Project Play and Aspen Institute. 2008, I believe that 46% of kids played team sports. So that's about half, a little bit less. In 2018, 10 years later, pre-pandemic, that number dropped from 46 down to 38% in just one decade of the number of kids playing team sports. And if we think about the impact that has on our society overall, kids are now in a video game, smartphone type culture where they don't have to worry about some coach yelling at them when they make a mistake. When they make a mistake on the video game, guess what? They get to start over and no one's sitting over their shoulder saying, no, run, jump, do this, go over here, hit that button. They get to do it and figure it out on their own. And we need to think about those stats because they're dropping out of sport. They're going to be less healthy, less active. That's going to cause a huge strain on our healthcare system as adults, as they grow into adults. And we talk about childhood obesity, heart problems, issues, all those types of things come into play. And I believe, that's why I believe as coaches, as sport leaders, we have this huge obligation to create these environments for the future caretakers of the games that we love so much.
Yes. Those stats are crazy. And, obviously, U.S. soccer is making an investment and pushing into this. And one of my thoughts is that that should be happening from every professional league. Everybody at the top should be making a huge investment in the bottom, because if they're not seeing it, those stats also mean that, well, people aren't going to be as interested in being fans of professional sports, right?
Yep.
But being involved in their local sports teams, those numbers are going to end up directly correlating to the pocketbooks of the top leagues and across sports, right? And so there needs to be this huge investment into, wow, we've got to make sure that we're fixing what's gone wrong with this model from the youngest age all the way up. Because like you said, and I think that's such a great point, why would I go play a team sport when I could play a video game that's more fun? I don't get yelled at. When I make a mistake, I just get to do it again.
Reset.
That should be how we're coaching, right?
Yeah.
But that's such a great point. And this generation of kids, young people, already are experiencing anxiety at higher levels than generations before them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, again, why would I go into a sporting environment that often is too challenging or not appropriate for where I'm at developmentally, and I have this negative experience? And so yeah, obviously I drop out. And as a parent too, like I have a couple of young kids. Why would I put my kid in that environment that's going to stress them out, that's going to be a negative experience, not a positive thing for their development? And I think most parents put their kids in sport because they do want it to be a positive impact and influence in their development as people. But if that's not happening, why would I do that? And so, yeah, thanks for sharing that stat. It's so alarming and such an indicator that we've got to make some changes, and we've got to invest at this young age so that it creates that lifelong participation and enjoyment of sport, because sports can be such a powerful force for good in kids' lives and communities in the world. And yeah, man, that's crazy. In just a decade, 10 years.
It's wild. It kind of, it's a challenge that we need to rise up to. If we see it as a threat, I believe the battle's lost already. I think you can see it as a challenge or a threat. If you see it as a threat, we're never going to change this environment. But if we see it as a challenge, we can rise up to it. And to see this challenge appropriately, we need to think futuristically. We need to think long-term. It's not just about this season. Yes, you want the kid to have a great experience that season, every day in training, every game, so they come back the next year. But think 5 years from now, when that 10-year-old is in high school, are they still playing a sport at their high school level? We find a lot of kids drop out because they don't make the varsity team, right, their first year, and then they just quit sports altogether. High school sports, I believe, are a great opportunity for kids to sample and play different sports. And unfortunately, we have these aspects in our culture where if kids don't succeed or they're not at that top level, they want to drop out. And that's again, looking at professional sports and trying to create a child environment that's based off of that model. And we cannot do that. We have to think about, the children's needs and create those player-centered environments around them so they stay in the game for a longer period of time. They ultimately grow up to become coaches like us, maybe referees, maybe presidents, executive directors of associations, ultimately fans that then coach their kids. And this is kind of where we're at in soccer right now, is that we're seeing some of the first generations of kids who grew up playing the game here in our country are now coaching their kids. And some of them coach the way they were coached. When I was 6 years old, I played 11 versus 11 on a huge field. And it was chaotic. I found this old VHS tape, my parents' house. Yes, they still have a VCR, so I was able to watch it. And it was wild watching me I think it was a 9-year-old, just running around this huge field and barely even touching the ball.
Have you used that in any of your coach education stuff? That's awesome. You should be showing that.
I have a couple of pictures that I use, but I haven't used those videos. But it's really wild to see. It's tough to get the VHS converted into something digital.
That's true. Yeah, gosh. Yeah, it's so interesting. You're right. There is that battle against just coaching the way you've been coached. And, one of the last topics I kind of want to hit on with you, Zach, you mentioned, oftentimes the coaches that are coaching, at those youth levels, but even oftentimes, up as they progress into that teenage years, those high school age, are often novice coaches. And I'm really curious to know, like, what are some of the fundamentals of practice design that you guys believe coaches need to be equipped with to provide that player-centered, appropriate experience? Because from my perspective, that is one of the most challenging pieces of coaching in general, but then especially for a novice coach that doesn't have formal education in it, or is new to it, or is only just doing what they experienced. What are the pieces of practice design that coaches need to be educated on to provide that positive experience?
Yeah, so I believe you don't have to be an expert in soccer to create a player-centered environment. And sometimes I think we have an over-professionalization of coaching in our sport of soccer. Parents defer to someone who has, a coaching license, or, they've played previously. And so they think that they know how to relate to kids. It's like the examples we talked about. Greg Popovich probably doesn't know how to, relate to kids. Maybe he does. I don't know. But you need to be an expert in fun. You don't need to be an expert in soccer or basketball or baseball. You need to be an expert in fun. And many parents are. And so some of the best coaches at the younger age groups are parents who know what they don't know. And they're not trying to be someone that they're not. You create an environment that's based off of fun and development. dignity and respect and safety. You don't need to be an expert in soccer to do that. One of the tools that we equip coaches with through our Grassroots Coach Education pathway, in addition to this framework, which gives us the ages and stages of development, is the training methodology called play, practice, play. And it's really that simple. Play small-sided games. Start off with a game. The kids are always asking you the one question when they come to practice.
When are we going to play?
When are we going to play, coach? So you're going to get it out of the way right at the beginning. And guess what happens? Those kids that are showing up late to practice are coming early now because they know that you already have the field set up. So I think planning is a key part of all this. So that would be a key characteristic. But planning, not just showing up and you're just going to scrimmage. No, you plan ahead. This is what we're going to work on. We're going to play some small-sided games. We're going to kind of attune them to the training session goal based off of your plan. And then we're going to ask them some questions. We're going to get them to think about it. We're going to get them to show us the answers. And then we'll get them to play a little bit more, ask them some more questions, and then get them to explain to us, and we have a discussion. So it's kind of that first play phase. Small-sided games, a lot of touches, a lot of fun, a lot of decisions to be made by them. You create the challenge for them based off of that training session goal, which is based off of what you observed them do in the game or your club's curriculum. The practice part is now where you apply some key concepts within that training session goal. So you're still playing game-like activities because soccer is this invasion team sport. It's attacking, defending, the moments in between. It's free-flowing. So you got to have that aspect of game-like in there because it's fun for them. It's fun for kids to learn through a game. So you start with the game. And you step in occasionally when you need to help them make better decisions. Not to step in always and tell them where to go and what to do. Sometimes that's appropriate, right? We shouldn't, I think, demonize the command aspect of coaching. It's needed sometimes, especially when the safety of players is something that needs to be there. But you really want to guide them. You want to facilitate this environment. Step in, ask them some questions, use some keywords, give some positive reinforcement when you see them doing it right, and then step out and let them play again. So that's kind of that practice phase. Then you move into play 2. Play 2 is the game. Now you're playing a larger game. So for instance, at U9 and U10, it's a 7 versus 7 game. The max roster size is 12 though. At US Soccer, we recommend limiting the roster sizes so that way kids are able to get playing time in the game. You don't have more kids sitting on the bench than you do that are actually on the field, right? That's one of those things as adults we have to do better of and creating these environments. But you play 6 versus 6 at that age group, or at 9 versus 9, the max roster size is 16. So you play 8 versus 8. And if all your players don't show up, you adapt. I think that's another key characteristic of a coach is to have a plan, be flexible within that plan, and then you let the kids play the game at the end, and you observe. You observe to see not how effective they are, but how effective was your teaching? How effective did you create the problem, the soccer problem for them in play 1? How did they create how did you co-create solutions in practice? And now in play 2, it's the fun of the game. They get to apply it. And it's all based on a games-based approach to teaching.
Yeah.
Kids learn through the fun of the game. It's what mirrors the game. We believe in reality-based learning. So the training must look like the game. They learn how to read the game. They learn how to make decisions. Ultimately, that's what learning is all about because they reflect on their decisions they made and they go back and they do it again the next time. And idea of life lessons. What a great life lesson to learn how to make decisions, solve problems, reflect on your decisions.
Win and lose.
Win and lose, yep. And then become autonomous, independent, critical thinkers. And that's those life lessons we need to help kids develop through sport.
Yeah, that's so good. There's a couple things I think are worth highlighting there. The first about numbers and fluctuating in your practice. Yeah, that happens to everybody all the time. One of the things I think coaches need to consider too is, let's say you have a roster of 12 and 11 people show up. Great, play 5 on 6.
Yes.
Like it doesn't have to be balanced. Actually, advantage, disadvantage games are really, really good for development. So play that, like have them all on the field. It's okay. Like, yes, the team with 6 may destroy the team with 5. Then just change one and give 6 to the other team and make it clear, like, guys, at times we're going to be in a game and we're going to be in a disadvantaged situation. How can we solve this here? Right? Like that's huge. I think the other thing that is within what you said, but I think it's worth just pulling it out a little bit more, is the importance of practice design being simple. And by that, I mean, not feeling the need to teach a bunch of new games and drills all the time. And they know how to play the game. So let's play the game, and we can adjust it with some constraints. We can change the numbers, right?
Yes.
Do some things to elicit the learning that we actually want to happen. But I think it's really important that coaches consider, like, do less with your games and drills. Focus on those more, because what happens and we talked about this earlier, that cognitive side of development is our working memory gets really overloaded when we're trying to learn a new game or a drill. And if we can teach less new games and drills, well, then their mind is freed up to actually focus on learning to make those skills and decisions, pair those together when they're playing offense versus defense.
Yeah.
Which, again, you said too, like, we've got the game is played offense versus defense. Our practice should be offense versus defense. You get better at playing soccer by playing soccer. You get better at playing basketball by playing basketball. Like and basketball and soccer are played with offense and defense. So we need to have them both out there. And yes, like there are times when a skill needs to become more automatic and isolated at times, but then it's got to be integrated as quickly as possible, because it doesn't matter how good you are at doing a skill on air. If you can't do it in a game with a defender there, then it's useless, right? Yeah. And so I just think those are the pieces too of practice design for coaches, are something we really, really need to be considering at all levels, but particularly the younger levels.
Yeah, and if I could go into that just briefly here, this is our biggest challenge with a games-based approach with play, practice, play, is that coaches or parents see it and they think, oh, they're just playing. They just roll the ball out and they let them play, and the coach isn't really teaching. And that comes back to, I believe, what is our viewpoint on American sports, that they're very coach-centered. If you look at ESPN and you see Nick Saban, yelling at some player, which, by the way, his behavior has changed very much the last couple of years. You see him being more player-centered as well. But we want to teach players how to make decisions and solve problems, and not just about learning a technique. Sometimes we take a progressive practice where we start with a technique, right? And we believe a technique is just moving your body. It's a way to move your body with the ball or a movement. A skill is different. A skill is within context. You're making a decision of when and where to use that technique. And so we're saying that, learning technique is still important, but maybe it's not the starting point in a games-based approach. We want to have kids have fun, so they keep coming back to those statistics from earlier. 2, we want them to learn how to play the game. So what we do in training transfers, that's reality-based learning. And so we help them develop skills rather than techniques. So if you need to start with a game and you find that the kid is really struggling technically because maybe physically they're not as developed as other players on the team, then you can pull that player out and work with them a little bit, one versus one or 1 versus 0, and then put them back into the game. So now they have a context for decision making. They understand why, when, and where they need to execute that technique. And that way it becomes a skill. So when we talk about skill acquisition, there are 4 major steps to it. It's about perceiving, so reading the game.
Yeah.
It's about deciding, making that decision. It's about executing on that decision. And then the 4th part is to reflect on the decision. And we need to create those types of environments where skills can be developed. It's not just about technique. People think that that's what the game should look like because they see the major sports, or that's the way they were taught. It's kind of a deconstructionist view, a reductionist view. We take the game apart and we put it into little isolated pockets, and then we train the kids on that. And then we put them back into this chaotic game, and we expect to see transfer of learning. And we just have to really think about that. Just because that's the way we've always done it doesn't make it right. So we challenge our entire country in the grassroots coach education pathway with this methodology of play, practice, play, because it is a player-centered methodology. It's based off of a player-centered philosophy that at the grassroots level, children learn and develop to their full potential through game-like experiences in an enjoyable environment.
That's so good. Yeah, and it's so true. And I think I'll add one thing in there, particularly in the practice phase, something I think maybe coaches have a hard time wrapping their mind around sometimes, is that, we don't need to isolate the skill totally. An effective thing to do, for example, in that practice phase, can be to work on a skill or decision with a guided defender or a guided offense. And by that, it means like you are instructing the defense, you're going to do this certain thing so that the offense sees it, then makes this decision. Or maybe defense, you have these 2 options. You can do X or Y. Offense, then you are going to do A or B based on what they do. And I think that's important for coaches to realize. That's a really powerful tool in that practice phase. If you're going to go with that play, practice, play model, which I really like, is in that practice model, as much as we can, let's avoid actually totally isolating and reducing it down to the specific skill. Let's keep it with the perception and action. They're perceiving and making a decision, because that skill has to have both in there. But let's do it with something like a guided defender, or we're using some constraint in some specific area of the game. Maybe it's transitioning to offense. We're working on this specific thing here, and we limit some options that they have so that they get better at making it. And like you said, at that last phase, we got to see, does it actually show up? Can they actually do the thing that we just practiced? I think it's really important for us as coaches to just consider, what is this thing that they need to improve on, and how can I break it down in a way that still contains the elements that they're actually going to experience in the game.
So that's spot on, Luke. I love listening to you explain that. In our practice phase, there's 3 levels to it. There's the core practice activity that you start with, and you see how they do. And then you decide, is it too challenging? Then you just step it back a little bit, less challenging. You change the demands of the activity. Maybe you modify the players or modify the teams. Those are kind of easy outs, I think, to modify the teams and just move players around. But can you modify the activity? Maybe the way they score challenges them to be different. Maybe it's the field size. So you can go and make it less challenging or more challenging based on their level of success. So we use 5, there's 5 elements of a training activity that we use at US Soccer. The first one's organization, as we talked about. How is the activity organized? The second is game-like. Does it look like the game? Is there attacking, defending, and those moments in between? The third is there repetition of your training session goal? Not repetition of a certain technique or skill, but are they getting opportunities to learn how to make decisions and solve problems on the goal that you planned out for them for that training session?
Yeah, if the goal is transitioning to offense or counterattacking, like there should be multiple opportunities where we're focusing on that.
And they don't have to be successful in all those opportunities. You want to create that struggle where they're successful and balanced about 50% of the time. And that kind of leads into the 4th element of challenging. It's got to be that appropriate level of challenge. And then once you get those 4 elements, they kind of work in order. Then you can go to the 5th element, which is coaching. And this is the funny part, because this is where we as adults automatically jump into, because we think our behavior impacts the player's behavior so much that we can step in immediately and tell them where to go and what to do and how to do it. But you need to check off those first 4 elements, organization, game-like, repetition, and challenging first before you step into coaching. Because if you do those 4, I think those are the key aspects of the training environment we could talk about from a little bit earlier, then the coaching almost takes care of itself. You're still needed. You still need to step in and guide and help them reflect and make better decisions. But taking care of those first 4 elements will make the coaching easier.
Yeah, and sometimes that coaching is just drawing their attention to a specific place. Something that is going well and why it's going well, or something that's not and why it's not going well. Like you said, it doesn't get rid of the need for our coaching. It just gives them opportunities to figure it out first, which I think is really powerful. Zac, this has been awesome. Really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with me. Before we wrap it up, I have 3 quick rapid fire questions I want to ask you, and then we'll get you out of here. The first one is this: the most fun part of coaching is
the relationships. No doubt. I'm here today. The reason I'm staying this afternoon, I have a player that was part of our ODP program in Alabama. She was actually cut the first year. We kept her involved. She came back. This was, 9 years ago. She's now a college All-American. And she invited me to come to her luncheon today because I had an impact on her life, not necessarily from cutting her from that Olympic development program, but because we kept her involved, because she wasn't as developed as those other players physically yet. We kept her involved, and she ultimately worked her way up to now being an All-American. So the relationship of her asking me to be here to celebrate with her today means so much.
Oh, that's awesome. So special. The next one is this: I wish I would have known blank before my first coaching experience.
I wish I would have known there was a formal coach education pathway out there. I coached for 5 years before I took my first formal course. And you don't know what you don't know. And I think formal education helps you know that there's more out there that you can continue to learn.
Yeah, it gives you frameworks, gives you ideas, examples too. Like we talked about earlier. Yeah, we don't know what we don't know. If we haven't seen it done a different way, It's hard to do it a different way.
Yeah. As coaches, we need to be the best teachers are the best learners.
Yeah.
And if we expect our players to come to train and learn, we need to go and educate ourselves as well.
Absolutely. Here's the last one. I know I'm successful as a coach when...
Back to that example from earlier, the kids want to come back year after year. They have that smile on their face. And when the training session's done, they say, "Oh, coach, is it over with? Do we have to go home?"
Yeah, man, that's such a good feeling. When they're bummed that it's over, you know you're doing something right. Zac, this has been fantastic. Before we wrap it up, just share with people where they can connect with you and learn more about the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, so you can visit ussoccer.com. You'll find our learning center on there. Through our US Soccer Learning Center, we have access to online courses that you can take at your own pace. Even if you're not coaching soccer, we found other coaches from lacrosse or basketball take them. They learn more about the play, practice, play model, the methodology, and they incorporate it. So ussoccer.com is a great way. My email address, reach out to me, zcrawford@ussoccer.org. I believe this game, my role is all about relationships, and we have to help each other. We are a community. It really takes a village to create these player-centered environments. We are stronger together. The diversity of our country is what makes us unique, and we need to work together to create these better player-centered environments.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Zac for joining me. As always, if you enjoyed this episode and want a free copy of the podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details. And Coach, if you enjoyed this episode or you enjoy the podcast in general, would you take a minute to either share this with a coaching friend or give us a shout out on social media? Those things go a long way in helping us impact more coaches who can then impact more athletes. And coaches, don't forget to check out summercoachingseries.com to learn more or get access to our 2022 Summer Coaching Series. It's full of practical ideas that you can apply in your coaching. That's summercoachingseries.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.